Welcome to another episode of Stretching Boundaries with Elasticity. I am Aaron Perlett, one of the hosts. Today I am joined by Colin Wheeler with VF Corp in Denver. Colin, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks, Aaron. It's good to be on the show.
It's great to have you. I was really excited we were able to make this work. Do me a favor. I think there's some people may not be familiar with VF Corp. I think a lot of people are going to be familiar with the brands that you guys sell. Tell our audience who and what VF Corp is and really what you do there.
Sure. Happy to. I'll try to make this somewhat short because it's actually got a long history. But the company VF started in 1899 in Pennsylvania and started out as sort of a silk stockings and mittens company in the textiles industry. And so started in apparel. And over time, sort of fast forwarding to kind of the 60s and 70s, they eventually wound up getting into kind of the denim and jeanswear business. And they bought a company which brought with it brands like Lee and Wrangler. And as a result, that became the kind of dominant part of the business. And they ultimately wound up moving the business to North Carolina, which was kind of the heart of the textile industry. And but then added to that portfolio a number of outdoor brands in the past 20, 30 years. Brands like the North Face, Vans, Timberland, Dickies. We own a number of packs businesses like JanSport, Eastpak. The portfolio has kind of accordioned over time. We've had as many as 30 or 30 plus brands. We're now down to 11 brands, but they're focused on kind of the apparel, footwear, and equipment, accessories business. And we're a publicly traded company. We about a couple, let's say in 2019, we wound up, VF Corporation wound up splitting off the jeanswear business into what is now called Contour, which is also a publicly traded company, and that stayed in Greensboro. When that happened, the rest of the brands and the legacy name VF, that company moved to Denver, Colorado, which is where I am now. We've been here for the past couple of years. It's been great. It's COVID obviously was a bit of a speed bump when we moved here, so that was unfortunate. But we're making our way in terms of building our presence here in Denver. And here I lead the global corporate communications department for the company. So that includes employee communications, external communications, media relations, social media, issues management, crisis management. We also have the VF Foundation, which rolls up into us as well. And we have about 25 people on the team globally. We have a team in Europe. We also have a team in Asia as well.
Now, at the end of the day, obviously, you're kind of leading strategic comms at the parent company level, and then it has to drill down into the brands as well. But what is your kind of bottom line responsibility? How do you see kind of the metrics that your chief executive and the board are going to hold you responsible for?
Yeah, I mean, like a lot of companies and a lot of people in this role, it tends to change and vacillate over time. And when I first got here, we were kind of sort of becoming a better version of ourselves, right? We were a new company. We had a very focused portfolio. There was a desire on the part of the administration or the sort of leadership team at that point to become more of a vocal and visible player in the industry. VF is obviously not a household name, but I think we kind of wanted to just push a little bit and be a little bit more proactive in terms of visibility. And so that involved a lot of reputation building, and we did a lot of that around specifically our kind of environmental stewardship, materials, what we're doing in terms of obviously our science-based targets. So that was a big kind of thought leadership push for us, as well as what we were doing in terms of kind of social justice issues and DEI after 2020 and George Floyd. There was a lot of activity going on in that space. A lot has changed since then, including our leadership team, as we're kind of working through this turnaround. and the priorities have changed because there's a lot of going on in terms of restructuring within the company. Employee communications, internal communications is a lot more important, I would say, to us now as a company. And so, in answer to your question, I'd say a lot more is around evaluating what we're doing in terms of making sure that the employee base understands the turnaround strategy, understands their role in sort of making that happen, and that the organization feels aligned. And so, we don't do that alone. Certainly, we do that with other kind of leaders across the company. But in terms of trying to kind of codify that and build and sort of sustain that narrative, I think that's a lot of what sort of leadership is looking to us for at the moment. But again, in a couple of years' time, that may go back to more of a balance between internal and external. But the moment, it's much more around employee engagement, is sort of the coin of the realm right now.
Yeah, and I imagine, particularly coming out of COVID, I don't know that internal communications has ever been more important because there's just been this kind of ebb and flow of culture and whether people are going to work full time in the office or not. We're seeing this heavy-handedly with the federal government right now. So it's a really interesting time as it relates to internal communications, particularly with large enterprises that have multiple sites that have to kind of manage a relationship and build a chemistry and culture throughout a dispersed workforce.
Yes, yeah, I think yeah, I've been doing this long enough. I think a lot of times, in the past couple decades, I think a lot of communications was very sort of externally focused, and maybe internal communications was maybe less of an emphasis. I think that has changed a lot, even independent of some of these changes most recently. But I think there's a lot of premium placed on making sure that employees feel like they understand where the business is heading, what their role it is, that the company's living up to their values, and it's a really important thing, I think, for communicators to be focused on as part of their portfolio.
Now, I know, you and I have chatted plenty of times in the past, and I believe your at least your master's was it international relations or international affairs at Columbia. Um, Talk about why coming out of that kind of academic background, why, and you and I met when you were still with Miller Coors. Why did you do what you do? Like, how did you end up as, a reputation management leader at, a publicly traded company?
Yeah, no, it's a good question. Life is serendipitous, and there's a good part of that too. I mean, I got into it. There was a period of my life when I was really sort of interested in um, international affairs, as you point out, was thinking about maybe the foreign service or something. And so the early part of my career after college was sort of focused on that, and so that kind of took me into my graduate work, and my master's work around international affairs. But then, as some life circumstances, as it turns out, I wound up sort of choosing to spend more of my time in New York rather than Washington and the kind of thing. And so I began to have to kind of figure out how I could leverage kind of my previous experience, and some of my education to the next step. And I had talked to some friends and was thinking about consulting, you probably around managed consulting initially, but then a friend had sort of put me on to some strategic communications consultancies as well. And I think it was a great opportunity, I think, to take advantage of my love of writing, and also just the opportunity to try and look after kind of complex things or complex events and try and distill them down into things, to sort of key stories that would be kind of understood by key stakeholders, whether they be media or employees or whatever. And so I think it was kind of the strategy element, and also the opportunity to write, and do more sort of strategic writing. I think that got me interested in this kind of initial stage of corporate communications, which was on the consulting side. I initially started out at Kext and Company, which is now called Kext CNC. But at the time I joined, it was kind of a small boutique that was focused on a lot of strategic financial communications, M&A, bankruptcies, crisis management work. At that point, I got kind of the bug for being in corporate communications. And I did that for a number of years on the consulting side. And then I ultimately decided to go in-house when we moved, and my family moved out here to Colorado. And so since whatever it's been, 2000, I've been in sort of corporate communications. And you're right, it's not an exactly linear connection between my graduate degree and what I'm doing, but certainly writing's always been a common element, I would
Yeah.
say, in all of that.
Yeah, I know I've always been I cut my teeth in reputation management, media relations, but I've always been a kind of a content creator at heart. I love creating content, uh, whether it's written form or even video. My formal education was in journalism. I thought I was going to go into broadcast journalism. I wrote so many TV scripts. I could wallpaper my home with them
You
and
were far
wallpaper.
more planful than I was, Aaron.
Yeah. So, obviously, environments change, politics can change them, global pandemics can change them, lots of things can happen, and then we've got to pivot as communicators, and in business in general. So, in this environment, what are the kind of the biggest obstacles that you face in your role, and those, and then the opportunities that you see that might arise from those same challenges you're facing, because they typically one produces another or vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, the change is constant, right? I mean, even within the field, right, things are changing. The media landscape's changing. How people consume information is changing. And then you've just got external factors as well. And I think that's also, tied to your earlier question, that's also the thing I love about the job too, is just the diversity of assignments, right? There's just so many different things that we are dealing with, whether it's, a leadership change, um, or it's an issue of an NGO or an advocacy organization um, coming after us on an issue that they are concerned about and want us to be more concerned about, or having to take account of what's going on down in Washington, right? And everyone's sort of paying attention to that. And so yeah, it does require us to be kind of agile and on the balls of our feet, particularly now. And it's again, as I mentioned earlier, we're kind of going through a bit of a turnaround, which requires a lot of attention in and of itself, let alone the kind of external factors that can change kind of your realities. And so, yeah, we're doing a lot of work to sort of see what's coming out of Washington, what's on their minds, how do we need to adjust? And I think what we always need to do, independent of some of these changes, is make sure that we're focused on the things for why we're in business, right? We're in business to make great products for our consumers, right? And we can't be too distracted by sometimes the noise in the system. And so that's what we're kind of focusing on, is making
Yeah.
sure that we're, making sure that our products are relevant, that they're innovative, that they're engaging our consumers, and that they're loved by our consumers. And I think, frankly, I think we may have gotten away from that a bit over the past couple of years, for lots of different reasons. But I think that's kind of what we're trying to return to and really focus. In fact, we reset our values when we had our new CEO come in, and it sounds obvious, but like one of the values is around being consumer centric. And you hear it a lot. Our industry as a generally is kind of going through a lot of change too. It's not just VF. I think if you look around, there are other kind of apparel companies that are going through similar kind of challenges, and you're hearing the same refrain, kind of the need to kind of say focus on consumers. And so, yes, we got to pivot in any given day on what's kind of going on in the outside world, but not lose track of what our core focus needs to be, which is around delivering for our consumers and making great products.
Yeah, I know one of the things where we've been leaning in, from a media relations standpoint, our PR team has really been thinking about, with traditional media having less and less influence seemingly on a daily basis, it's what becomes the charge, and we've looked at, the influencer space as from a similar mindset, and really kind of focus that mindset of public relations on the influencer space, and trying to think about how do we leverage this thirst for influencers when we're dealing with a consumer end product that's targeting consumer, and the massive sway that some of these influencers can have,
Yeah.
if they're well selected. This whole thing, we stretching boundaries is about doing just that. Our name, Elasticity, has always been about being progressive. From whether it's a pride standpoint or just matter of fact, where do you kind of feel like you and your team are stretching boundaries, are kind of trying to be more progressive because you are in a heated environment in terms of the competition in your space, and it might be high quality, it might be on par with the
Yeah.
products you guys sell, or it could be these terribly cheap products that are being made and sold on Temu or what have you.
Yeah.
How are you guys staying ahead, being progressive in the space?
Yeah, I'd say one of the things we're trying to do is if you look in our the apparel space, there are a lot of mono brands, what we call mono brands. So they're singular brands, right? They're not a family of brands. I mean, even Nike, which has got a couple of other sub brands, the reality is it's like Nike is the by far and away the biggest brand within that company. But you go down the line and looks at, whether it's Montclair or Canadian Goose on the jacket side, right? Or Carhartt. There are a lot of mono brands. And so, whereas we're a multi-branded company, and that's just a different game. And, for a lot of folks, maybe they feel like being a multi-branded company is kind of a disadvantage as opposed to being a mono brand. But if you look across industries, so outside of the apparel industry, a lot of the successful companies, not all of them, but a lot of the successful companies actually are multi-branded companies. So P&G, um, Diageo, right, in kind of the spirits business is a multi-branded company. And I think what we're trying to do is maybe somewhat counterintuitive, is to be the super successful multi-branded company in apparel and footwear. And that I think is different, I think, in many ways within our industry, and make that more of a virtue rather than a kind of detriment. And so, that takes a lot of work to come up with kind of a model, for how you go to market and how you develop product and your kind of whole commercial engine, um, that you can then allow brands to come in and sort of plug and play on the VF chassis, so to speak. And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do, is come up with a standard approach, which sounds kind of like a not so positive word, but I think we're trying to come up with a standard approach that's really effective in terms of, again, how you develop product all the way through getting it to market, but do that across a multi-branded, portfolio. And so that I think is unique within our industry.
Awesome. Colin Wheeler, VF Corp, thank you so much for being with us on Stretching Boundaries. Really appreciate your time today.
Thanks so much, Eric. Appreciate it. Take care.